Hey everybody, Spencer from Geek of Spades here, and today I want to talk to you about Malifaux. Now before we dive in, I got something I gotta get out of the way. I personally am not a fan of diceless systems. There's just something about flipping a card, or playing a card, or drawing a card that doesn't hold the same thrill to me as rolling a die. And I accept that that's kind of a bias of mine. However, I'm not going to let that seep into this review, so don't worry about that. It's just a personal thing. But I pride myself on at least minor professionalism, so we're going to go in completely ignoring the fact that I'm not a huge fan of playing with cards, which is why I infinitely prefer Warriors over Dominion. So with that out of the way, how does Malifaux 2nd edition hold up? Pretty damn well. So yes, this is the 2nd edition of Malifaux from Weird Miniatures. Now for those of you who don't really know, Malifaux is sort of a Old West Victorian Gothic steampunk fantasy setting. And it's a kind of neat combination of things. It does kind of feel a little too scatterbrained at times, but I think it pulls it off pretty well. Now, of course, the thing that makes Malifaux different is that it's a diceless system. In fact, it was really the first one I can think of. In this day and age, every game kind of needs its gimmick, and Weird went with a whole opposite direction and decided to go no dice. So each player needs a 54 card deck, which is 52 cards plus the 2 jokers. And you can use a standard deck of cards, or you can buy the actual Fate decks that Weird sells, which are really just standard deck of cards, but with the suits changed. Now, first of all, I actually want to talk about the book, which is something I'm actually a big fan of as a collector of gaming books. And this book is really nice. Everything about it is well made. It's soft cover, so it doesn't weigh 400 pounds. It's actually a pretty decent size, all things considered. And all the art and diagrams and stuff in here is in full color, which is something I really like, especially since this retails for $40. So being a diceless system, how does Malifaux work? Well, you flip cards. Each player always has a hand of 6 cards, and this is kind of where the mechanics break down a little bit for me. You have a hand of 6 cards and you can cheat fate, wherein if the card that's flipped isn't one you're particularly favorable of, you can play a card from your hand and replace it. And I feel like that kind of takes some of the luck out of the game, but I guess that's kind of their shtick. It's not terrible by any means, but there's one problem. There feels like there's very little risk involved. You see, at the beginning of every turn, you take your discard pile and you shuffle it back into your deck. So high-level cards that you spend aren't gone. They can keep coming back. And I feel like that kind of took some of the risk management and the resource management out of the game, which means cheating fate really doesn't feel like it has any consequence if you do it too much. Still, by all means, it's not bad, it's just kind of weird for me to get my head around. So mechanically speaking, the game's pretty solid. It has that little weird hiccup of resource management, not really having any risk, but that might just be me. But it's a good game, it's a solid system, and it works. Still, there are a couple of problems. For starters, the rulebook's kind of weirdly laid out, as in things aren't necessarily explained in the order you think they'd be explained in. Like, you have how to do attacks, and then doing damage is like 2 or 3 chapters later. It's kind of weird, but it's not a huge knock against the game. It's more just a personal pet peeve. I like my games to be organized. Speaking of personal pet peeves, the stat cards in this game are organized really weird too. You would think when you have a stat card, the first things you would want is your movement value, but the movement value is like the 4th or 5th stat listed on a card. And then you have 2 different movement values. You have walk and charge. They took the initiative to not make it so charging is just double your movement, but it just seems kind of weird to have 2 movement stats. Now mind you, these are all minor nitpicks from just an anal retentive dick, but they do kind of make it feel a little wonky. The game's still good, the rules are still solid and everything like that. I went through this book trying to find anything that was like broken or grossly overpowered, and there's really nothing like that. It's actually really well balanced. Now, I mentioned that the book is $40, and you actually get your bang for your buck. There's a lot going on in this book, because you have the rules, you have the fluff, you even have the missions, so it's never just a straight up brawl. And then you also have a bunch of stuff for the different factions. And there's quite a few factions in this game. You have the Guild, Resurrectionist, Neverborn, Arcanist, Outcast, and the Ten Thunders, and the Gremlins. So you actually have 7 armies in this book. This does bring me to a slight point of contention. The armies feel like there isn't a lot going for them. I get that they're trying to release stuff in waves, but some of it just seems a little weird. For example, obviously they're trying to retool their entire line into plastic, and that's great. But there was a bunch of stuff that came out in plastic really not long before the book came out that's not in here, like Guild Rifleman or Lazarus or stuff like that. And it just seems like a weird missed opportunity. It just seems weird. There's a lot missing out of the book. And again, I get they're trying to release stuff in waves, but it's just kind of odd. There's entire masters missing. Like Hoffman's not in it, and there's a whole bunch of units that aren't in it, like the aforementioned Guild Riflemen, who are a really cool kit, and they aren't in here, but regular Guild Guard who aren't plastic models are. It's just a little off to me. Speaking of the miniatures, Malifaux has an amazing range of models, and really there's just a huge selection for you to pick from. Each faction has like 3 or 4 masters, and then they all have henchmen which can act as a crew leader in a small enough point game. And a lot of the models are just great. Even the older stuff really holds up. And I'm a huge fan of a lot of the aesthetic. And there's some models that don't do it for me, but might do it for you. But like the Guild and the Outcast, I think they look fantastic. Although I will say the one sculpt I'm kind of sad they changed is the Victorias. I really like their old alternate model better than the new plastic ones. There's just something about them that just has a little more character to them. Don't get me wrong, the new plastic ones are still good. They just don't do it for me as much. So yeah, Malifaux is a very, very solid game. Putting aside my biases, it is mechanically sound, and it's well written, if a bit oddly organized and worded at times. And overall, it's a good deal. You get a lot for your buck for this book, and if you're interested in Malifaux, if you're interested in that kind of game, I highly suggest picking it up, checking it out. If you're looking for something completely different from your standard tabletop skirmish game, this is definitely a good way to go. So guys, thanks for watching, and be sure to keep it here to Geek of Spades, because we're going to have a lot more going on for Malifaux, including more unboxings in the future, as well as a Learn to Play series, and probably even some bat reps and painting tutorials to go over some of the cooler stuff that's coming out for this game. So if you're looking for more Malifaux, we've got it.